was surprised at how emotional an experience it was, walking up and seeing the plane, and just the retrospect of 50 years, but to see the plane restored in the condition it's in, it's amazing.
You have some documentation of them altering these.
Yes.
Like back then.
They actually took them off the #1 F-15.
There you go.
Cut them down the night before and put them on. Found out that the instruments and controls were all missing out of the airplane when I started on it. We had to remove the canopy off of it, and I was really kind of shocked when I looked in it and saw how bad it was inside. There was 0 controls or instruments in it. A lot of help from a lot of people all through the United States on information to find out what instruments was in the plane. And one of them was Dennis Jenkins, who is a well-known author of aviation and space. He had contact with one of the pilots that set the records, and he had done a drawing of the instrument cluster, and Dennis sent that to me. So that's how we found out what instruments and where they was, what was removed. A lot of the heavier instruments were removed. The radar was removed. The radios was removed. The heads-up display was removed. There was other instruments that went into those locations. A lot of the instruments had to be moved up due to the higher altitude records. They had a spacesuit on. In the spacesuit, it was very awkward to look down, so they moved the controls up to where they could see them better.
Sort of like, live for the day, enjoy your buddies, you know, lean on your friends and your family, and it was an extended family.
And there's your autograph
version.
copy.
Yeah.
From a standing start on the runway to kicking into full afterburner, you know, he gets to the top of his arc of this climb, and right about at the top of the arc, he's at about 30,000 feet. Well, right about then, he was only about, I want to say he was about less than a minute into the flight, and then he turns it over and he's hitting probably close to Mach 2 at the top of the arc. By the time he's hitting about 98,000 feet, he's doing probably about Mach 2. And the engines start drawing down, the density of the air starts getting more and more, so it shuts the engines down. He gets it to about 100,000, a little over that top, and he kind of noses it over and brings it back down. He tried restarting the engines at probably somewhere around maybe 50,000 feet. It wasn't enough air, only one of the engines was spinning, so he shut them down, brings it back down to 30,000 feet. Finally, the engines have enough air and density to be able to restart them, and then he was able to coast it back into the runway at Grand Forks Air Force Base.
All the sonic booms we used to hear at Edwards Air Force Base, and of course we kind of got used to it, but Dad used to laugh and say, yeah, it's the sound of freedom right there, and we grew up with that belief. Yep.
Come see the F-15, because I can tell you, it is a fantastic example, a symbol of the deterrence that ended the Cold War. This aircraft is what helped really do that. Our technology, and we would one-up them every time, so that's what did it. Besides this project, he was in on the development of the F-15 in its early years. So not just this cockpit configuration, the original cockpit configuration that went in the F-15A, he was on a committee of 4 other pilots, and they designed that cockpit. So the F-15 was a response to not having a total air roll fighter, okay, that could do what the F-4 or better what the F-4 did. And obviously the target was to be able to combat the MiG-25. And so the Foxbat kind of scared everybody, and the F-15 was our response to that. So him being on board in those early years, I mean, I remember when he got back from Southeast Asia, seeing his desk in his office, and there was glass on the desk, and then underneath the glass were different illustrations of planes. And one of them was this rendering of this new plane. I was like, what is that? And he goes, oh, we're getting ready to build that. That's the F-15. Yeah, he was there from the beginning in that program. Yeah. And he talked about it a lot.
And we were remarking today as we were coming in, we saw the F-15 out front of the museum. We're like, here it is 50 years later, and that plane is still in active duty. throughout the world. And it's really an amazing testament to what an incredible design that was. So I think it was after the 3 records that McFarland set when they landed, they did an inspection, they found 11 separate places that were cracked. And I guess they brought in a crew from McDonnell Douglas and flew them in on the corporate jet, and they worked all night long and patched it by hand in all those places for it to set the remaining records, which is really just...
And that's what these are?
That's what these little places, those patches.
Plane had a lot of color to it. There was iodine on the aluminum that gave it a goldish color, and the purple was what the rivets was during the record attempt. The plane has lost a little bit of its color due to 50 years old right now. They had the 50th anniversary of the first flight of the F-15 in June, so that was quite a feat, and it's still flying today. The F-15 does not fly with a pitot tube, but there was a pitot tube, very long pitot tube, on this airplane. And we have remanufactured that pitot tube. One of our volunteers in restoration made that at his own machine shop he owns. And he's dedicated his time and his money on doing that pitot tube.
Just realizing what they did with these, we have bigger computers on our phones now, so it's whoa, amazing.
One of the things they would have to do before they would take on a flight was they would have to configure the things in the cockpit for the navigation, radio frequencies and things like that. And one of my favorite photos, he's got the red helmet up on the front part of the cockpit just resting there, and he's in there doing that, and he's got his tongue hooking out the side of his mouth. He's configuring the cockpit. I just love that. He would sign up for flights, like photo flights and chase flights on some of the other programs that were going on at Edwards. He had a golf game this one weekend scheduled, so he didn't sign up for any of that. And he was out about on the 9th hole at Edwards, and he looked out on the horizon, and there was a large smoke coming up, and he knew what it was, and it was the XB-70 accident. And he always told that story as a way of telling us that, you know, it's chance. You just don't know. You roll the dice. You do the best you can with the training you got, but sometimes things happen, you know? They actually had come up with this name already, okay? At the time, what was going on in the news, at FSU in Florida, students were streaking. And it started as protest behavior, and they would strip off all their clothes and only have tennis shoes on, and they would run across the quad track. And so this was a big deal, and this is where streaking came from. That was part of the news of current events. They called it the Streak Eagle because they weren't going to paint it. It was going to be the naked aircraft.
He was an amazing pilot. He was an incredible person. You know, he was there for my brother and I whenever we had an opportunity. We just felt like it was just untouchable. He made that possible for the both of us. He made sure that we had the futures that we were going to have today. I mean, my brother's a major in the United States Army, and he's stationed in Fayetteville, North Carolina.
I will say, Dad was involved in delivering the C version to NATO a few years later. And I think that was a message. I think that was a message that they were trying to send the Soviet Union. This guy that set the record, he's delivering our first F-15s to Europe.